where you're first to see your book, right?
Exactly.
All right, so again, welcome everybody. We're really glad that you're here with us today. We're going to go through the program for you real quick. And yes, okay. So we want to start by thanking Unique Photo for having us here today. As I said, this is an awesome place if you've never been here before. They sell equipment, they also rent equipment. They have the camera show coming up December 7th, 8th, and 9th, and there'll be all kinds of great things happening here. Yeah. So come back and check it out. We want to thank our publisher, Amherst Media. Amherst is one of the largest publishers of photography-related books in the world. We're really excited to be on their roster. They have about 300 different titles, so if you're interested in different types of photography, they have a book for you there. We want to thank all our friends and followers on social media. I know a lot of you guys follow us on social media. We're really glad that you're here and that you contribute to us on social media every day. Thank you for that. Of course, we want to thank our families who've been putting up with us for the last however many years. I don't want to give away anybody's age, but so without their love and support, we wouldn't be here. And we want to thank everybody who purchased the book, and especially we want to thank you guys for braving the cold weather and life in northern New Jersey to come out here and join us today. We're glad that you're here. Scott, do you want to say anything about Unique before we get started?
You did great, by the way. I don't know if I you went into that, but it was a great plug. I just want to invite everybody. First, thank you for coming. I just want to invite everybody here to the camera show. We're going to have a big show December 7th, 8th, and 9th. I hope you guys can make it. We do a lot of classes, a lot of workshops, a lot of shooting experiences, and it's something that we work really hard on. So I would love to see you guys there at the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
I have some flyers over here. We have our class schedule. If you guys want to pick one up on the way out, that'd be good.
All right, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with some introductions. Then we're going to jump right into our program. We're going to talk about 7 great spots to photograph in New York City, and we're going to do that with photographs. And we're going to talk about, we're each going to show some of our photos. We're going to talk about how we took them, why we took them, locations, camera settings, things like that. And I'm going to ask everybody, hold your questions until the end. We have a lot that we need to cover, but we're going to save about 30 minutes at the end of the program for everybody to get their questions answered. All right? Any questions? And then after the Q&A, we're going to do our book signing. And we do have copies of the book available for purchase. They're $25, and we'll all be happy to sign them for you. So we're going to start with introductions. I'm going to go first. My name is Peter Alessandri. I'm a professional photographer. I'm based in Dover, which is not far from here. I do commercial product photography, architectural photography. I do executive portraits and headshots. And near and dear to my heart is my fine art photography. As you'll see, I do a lot of New York cityscapes in terms of my fine art photography. I have won 65 awards for my photography over the last few years, and I'm an official photographer for Fireworks by Grucci, which is one of the largest fireworks companies in the world. They send me around the world to photograph their events. I'm going back to Dubai in January for New Year's Eve, December. And my vision is to have my own gallery, fine art photo gallery, and then have a series of galleries in major cities and resort destinations around the world. And I need an investment of about $500,000 to start that, so if anybody's available, see me after the show. And I also do workshops. So if anybody's interested in photographing the full moon over New York City, you'll see some of my photos today. I do workshops, one-on-one tutoring, that kind of thing. I also speak at camera groups and so on. So that's me. Bill, why don't you go next?
Sure. So my name is Bill Burnell, and I've been shooting both personally and for work over the last 25 years. And just recently I've been really investing more time in shooting because I travel a lot for work. I have now 2 handles. My photo fund is really from all my travels. I go out west a lot, and NYC Photo Fund, I work in the city, so I shoot a lot in the city. And I've gotten to know a lot of the different spots to shoot. And it's really a fun time. I have 3 kids and a wife, so they keep me busy, and I take them wherever I can to shoot because it's cheap as opposed to going out to dinner or to the movies. And they just have to put up with me shooting. So that's me.
Who's that? Gina?
Okay, my name is Gina Brake. I was born in Brooklyn. I live in Staten Island. I got into photography with my husband, who's on the camera there, full break. Hello. And we do a lot of street photography. We have a Facebook group with 35,000 members. And basically, he taught me a lot about photography. I didn't really know much about it before. I would just take pictures. I didn't know anything about settings or anything. And he taught me all that. We do a lot of stuff in the street, and I just don't know what to say. I don't even know what to say. That's about it. I don't know what to say. I really
That's great, Gina. Thank you.
It's fine. Yeah, great.
Okay, Vic?
Hello, my name is Victor, last name Raski. I was born in the Ukraine, and then I moved here when, in the years when I was young. Photography is really just my hobby. Recently I went to New Zealand on vacation for a trip, and I love that place so much. It's so beautiful, so yeah, that's it. Tell me more about yourself.
All right, and then next up we have Max.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Max Giuliani. I was born in the West Village of New York, and I've been shooting for about 5 years. I take I like taking landscape photography, and also I shoot events. I work for Hudson River Park Trust, which is on the west side of Manhattan. It runs from Chambers to 59th Street, and we have over 300 free events all summer. And I attend everything from kayaking to like dance classes to music, and I photograph all of it. So it's really helped me become well-rounded in a bunch of areas. And I love going around and taking photos of the ever-changing city, the skyline, how weather looks on the city, and just inspired by everyone here, everyone's photos. And thank you for being here today, guys.
Thank you, Max. Jason.
Hey everyone, my name is Jason Risordo. I'm a Brooklyn-based, mostly landscape and cityscape photographer. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming out and supporting us. I'm more of the technical guy of this group, I'd say, so if you want to chat about camera settings or gear or something like that, I'm definitely the guy to talk to on that front. I specialize in more kind of seascapes and interesting lighting scenarios around New York. And as Peter mentioned, in terms of accolades, I was featured in BuzzFeed's How to Take the Best Instagram of New York. I've been published by Nikon, Beautiful Destinations, and the like. So look forward to giving you some insight into some of my work.
Okay, and Corinne.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Corinne. I'd like to preface this by saying my photography resume is nowhere near Peter's and some individuals here. However, I am very passionate about the craft. By day, I'm in corporate America, but anytime in between, I really do identify as a photographer, specifically focusing on cityscapes and landscapes. New York has really kind of been my motivation for getting into photography, specifically the skyline of New York City. In terms of where I'm from, definitely not born and raised in New York City. I actually came from the Middle East and kind of made my way around the world and ended up in New York for my undergraduate degree. And here we are, so thank you very much for being here and for your support. This is extremely exciting.
All right, so if you guys don't already follow us on social media, please take out your phones. Our Instagram handles are right there. You can add us to your list. And if you haven't seen the book yet, I think one of the things that's most interesting for me about the book, besides the great photographs, is everybody's individual stories. Because we all have a different story about how we came to photography, when we came to photography, why we came to photography. So if you get a copy of the book, you'll see we each have a chapter in the book, and we have our bio in there that has our entire, not our entire, but enough history to give you a sense of how we came to who we are. And the thing that's, again, very interesting for me is we all came to it in different ways at different times. And yet what we all share is that passion, which I assume a lot of you have, Frank, which I assume a lot of you have because you're here on a Sunday to hear us talk about photography. So you probably have that same passion. I do want to say this is my dream team. I love these guys. I'm so excited. I was so excited when they said yes to work with me on this book. And as I've gotten to know them, it's only solidified that they're great people as well as great photographers. So we're really excited to be here with you guys today. So we're going to jump in. So these are the 7 great spots to photograph in New York City. Notice that they're not the 7 best spots. Somehow that worked its way into the unique calendar. They're the best spots because not the best spots because everything in New York is the best spot. There's no absence of great things to photograph in New York City. So this is what we picked to talk about today. We're going to go through each of these one by one, and we're going to show you photos and talk about how and where we did the photos that you see. All right, so we're going to start with the Empire State Building. So the Empire State Building was completed in 1931. I think it was the tallest at 1,454 feet. I think it was the tallest building in the world until the World Trade Center was completed, the original Twin Towers in the 70s. So it had a long reign as the tallest building in the world, and it's a spectacular building, both inside and out. It's built in the Art Deco genre that was pretty popular back in the 30s. If you've never been inside, it's as amazing inside as it is outside. And so we're going to show you some of our photos of the outside of the Empire State Building. We're going to start with Bill's photo.
So usually when I'm going into work, I have time to go shoot sunrise before I go into work. And this spot is by, if you've never been in Hoboken, by the Lighthouse. And it's taken with a telephoto lens. I have a 70-300 with a crop sensor, so it's really about 450. And here I was trying to capture the light coming behind this new building that was rising there and capturing the light reflections on the water. My settings are probably 100 ISO. I would say probably a half second on my shutter speed, and probably about f11 for it. So
that's sunrise. So you're facing east.
Yes, I'm facing east. So this is always a great spot. I've shot this spot a lot because between the clouds and the sky and the sun, you get a lot of different views, even though it's the same buildings. And so at different times of the year, it's great. It's a great spot to shoot.
All right, thank you, Bill. This is Gina's shot. Gina, what the heck is going on here?
All right, this was last year, I think. It was the Harper's Bazaar 150th anniversary, and they projected onto the Empire State Building, I think, covers from like the last 150 years. And this shot I grabbed on the top of the rock, but you're not allowed a tripod up there. So I had to do this handheld through like a plexiglass thing, and I used a 90mm macro for this, 2.8, and I held it steady like on a, I don't know, like a piece of metal that was there. And I think I shot it at 2.8, and I on maybe really low, maybe like 1/60th of a second. And they kept putting like new stuff every couple of minutes, the covers and everything. And this one really caught my eye because it was really cool looking, so I called it Eye of the Empire.
So for those of you who don't know, the Empire State Building has tower lights, and they're different almost every night. They're usually to commemorate some event, or they could be a corporate sponsor, or they could be a charity or something like that. And a couple of times a year, they do these things where they actually project onto the side of the building. So you'll see another one in a minute from Max. I don't know the schedule, maybe you guys know, the schedule for the tower lights is available on the Empire State Building website. So you can see what's coming up, what past lights have been. But as far as the projection goes, does anybody know if they publish that schedule anywhere?
They usually announce it on their Twitter or
Is that what it
Instagram.
is?
Yeah.
Okay. So you got to just kind of keep an eye out for that. All right, Creed.
Yes. So my favorite, just to kind of mention this, my favorite color is truly the color of sunrise, especially a good sunrise. So this photo here was taken from the New Jersey side. So once again, it is facing east in Weehawken, New Jersey, which essentially is just outside of the city in Hamilton Park. So it was a pretty cold morning, I have to admit. I remember this morning very, very well. And fortunately, just the explosion of color that came up was amazing. Now, I think you'll see this in a few of my other photos that are presented here today. But I really do enjoy the technique of long exposure photography. And what long exposure photography is, for those that aren't familiar, is essentially you keep the camera shutter open for an extended period of time. And that way it captures all the movement that is going on within the photo, such as the water movement. So you see it is very smooth, as well as the sky movement, or here the cloud movement, that essentially the clouds are moving in this, and the open shutter captured that.
Do you need any special equipment for that?
You do. I mean, the recommendation, well, first of all, tripod is imperative, because if you're trying to shoot long exposure photography and you try it handheld, what ends up happening is the still subjects in the photo are also blurry, right? Because your hand is moving. So what you're trying to capture is the environment that is moving. However, the still images or the still subjects within the photos are completely still. So you absolutely need a tripod in order to shoot long exposure. In addition, in order to avoid, when you're shooting, when it's starting to get light out, right? One thing with shutter, as you know, is exposure. So if you keep your shutter open for an extended period of time, you run the risk of an image that you produce being overexposed, meaning there's too much light in it. So there are certain filters that you can use that help with avoiding that, and you put those filters on the lens. There's various stops for those filters depending on how much light you are dealing with in your surroundings. For this, I did use a neutral density filter around 6 stops, and this is what came out of it.
Okay, and if you guys have questions about long exposure photography, we'll take those at the end. Max.
Well, it looks like I was there the same night you were there. But yeah, this is another photo from that you know.
Harper's Bazaar, was it?
Yeah, it was Harper's Bazaar, and it was projections on this side of the building. In years past, it was on the south side of the building, so it would be better to be in Lower Manhattan to capture the projections on the Empire State. But this time, it was on the northern side, so it was good to be on the top of the rock facing down. And I remember that night because it started off raining a little bit, and it was really chilly. There was a lot of photographers up there, you know, anticipating the same shot too. And yeah, it was just, you know, amazing just to capture it with the World Trade, and you have the Hudson down below with the Statue of Liberty, and I think this might be the Verrazano or the Brooklyn, probably Verrazano Bridge. But yeah, and this was taken on my Canon. As you mentioned, you know, we couldn't bring tripods, so it had to be a short exposure, probably about a half a second, and that's about it.
Now you actually can bring a tripod to the top of the rock, but it has to be a very small one, and it has to be able to fit on the ledge that goes around the top of the rock. The thing they don't want is tripods on the ground where people could trip over them and that kind of thing. If the security guard sees you with one of those, you're out of there.
They still give you a hard time with those ones, thoe.
The ones that wrap.
Small one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're on the ledge, you're okay.
No, you're not. So it really depends. Yeah, really just be nice to the security guards. That's the way to get the shot.
How about a beanbag?
It depends on the security guard. Beanbag?
Beanbag, yeah.
Probably okay.
And one more thing to add onto that photo is that in other years past, the other projections have been one about, they projected endangered species like animals on that side, and that was, to just spread awareness about how our climate's changing, and we really need to look out for these animals that are endangered. And the other one was the election, and they showed the polls and the different states, and they had Hillary and Trump, their statistics as the polling went on.
And one of the really cool things, just to add about being part of the kind of Instagram photography community, is so many of us, that's actually how we probably got to know each other, is so many of us run into each other at these different sites. And so essentially they were in the same location.
Yeah, we were probably
at the same
standing
time.
right next
So
to each other.
You're
and
probably
we
going
didn't
to
know.
see photos throughout this exhibit that where we were actually at one point or another kind of ran into each other and kind of made a good time out of it. So
I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's how I know these guys, is basically from Instagram, running into them at a specific location and just getting to know them. I mean, that's how I met Jason, that's how I met Bill, that's how I met Vic, that's how I met Max. Gina, I know you from the Facebook group.
I remember I met you on the beach in the dock.
Right.
The fireworks, I heard somebody calling my name.
Yeah.
And we also met for the first time out shooting something.
Yep.
All right, so this is my photo. So as I said, I do a lot of shots of the full moon, the crescent moon, the half moon over New York City. And so this is a photograph. This is actually a couple of years old. This was taken from a location in the Meadowlands. It was actually a landfill, and about 7 miles out. And thankfully that night there was a breeze. I've been to that landfill before. Better? And the methane is so bad it will knock you out. So now the reason I went to 7 miles out is because the further away I am from my landmark, the larger the moon appears in relationship to it. So this is an actual photograph. I haven't messed with it in Photoshop, none of that. It's a combination of a long telephoto lens. It was probably around an equivalent of around 500 or 600 millimeters for this shot. And when the moon is low on the horizon, the atmosphere actually acts as a magnifier, it magnifies the size of the moon. So it's a combination of that.
All right, this is my first shot. So I think one thing I should preface in my work is a lot of times I have a rule where I focus a lot on light and clouds. So typically if there's going to be clouds for a sunrise or sunset, that's typically when I shoot. I try to shoot towards the clouds because the sun will illuminate it. And if I know there's going to be no clouds, I typically have the sun behind me to illuminate the foreground with light. So this is notably an exception to that rule. It's funny, this is the first one, but it's me trying a new concept. So the sun was rising from the east. This is a bit further north from where Bill was, I think in Newport, New Jersey. The interesting concept, which most people probably wouldn't notice here, is that you'll see the light reflecting off of the buildings. So like in the Whitney, you'll see the red light, and that's really the light coming up from the sunrise, reflecting off the glass towers in New Jersey, and then reflecting back onto the foreground in Manhattan. So that's something that kind of drew me into this photo, but you might really not pick up on it if you didn't look into it. Ideally, I was just trying to get the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, to look as close as possible. And then something that you'll notice with a lot of my photos is I try to incorporate some sort of foreground interest as well. So you'll see the piers coming up, and similar, it's probably a few second exposure. You're able to tell that from just kind of the blurred water.
So this was sunset, right?
Sunrise.
This was sunrise?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of times I either shoot sunrise or sunset. Typically I find my best result is at sunrise, mainly because there's no people there. Unfortunately, it's normally freezing, so I have a Costco-sized box of hand and toe warmers, and I'm normally bundled up. So most of these photos that you'll see up here, I was shivering. I could barely feel my fingers or toes. So sometimes you have to put in the work to get the shot.
Great, thank you, Jason. And now Vic.
I think I was standing on a roof for this one with a very small tripod, really small. I took a picture on an open lens, about 600 to 35, 9.
16 to 35.
16 to, thank you, I don't know all the photography words. 30 SE.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, thank you. Sometimes the interpreter needs an interpreter.
Yeah. So it was a 30-second shutter, essentially. So the shutter was open for 30 seconds in order, once again, to capture that movement of
Yes,
of
right.
clouds.
Now, this is a great example of if you gain access to a rooftop in New York City, you get a unique view. All the other views that you've seen so far have pretty much been from publicly accessible locations. Not sure how Vic managed to get up on the roof for this one, but that's something that we it's something that you want to consider. If you want a shot that doesn't look like everybody else's shot, one of the things that you want to do as a photographer is find a unique location. So Vic managed to find one in this situation. I love this shot. This is one of my favorite shots from the book. So I'm glad it made it. All right, next up, Statue of Liberty. So you guys are probably all really familiar with it, but in case you're not, it was completed in 1886. It's 151 feet tall. It's been restored a couple of times over the last century or so. And it's definitely one of my favorite locations to shoot. You have great views from either Lower Manhattan, Battery Park. Brooklyn has some great views from Red Hook. And then Liberty State Park, which is if you're in New Jersey, is also a great spot to get some good shots. So Bill, what's going on here?
So, just going to say, you're going to see a lot of pictures from this viewpoint, and I'm going to give you the address right now. It's 403 Port Jersey Boulevard in Bayonne. So you should write that down.
Bayonne, New Jersey.
Bayonne, New Jersey, yes. And there's a long stretch of road that you're really not supposed to stop on. I've been there a handful of times. I have yet to have any security bother me. I've been there at night, during the day, morning. But really the reality is you shouldn't go onto the rocks. You should park in the gravel, have your tripod already set up, have your settings, get your shot, and get out. Do not hang around. And that way you won't have any problem with the cops. This shot, you can, from this street, you can get a lineup of the Statue of Liberty with the Empire State Building and 432 Park Ave, and you can get this view that you see here. This shot happened to be probably about, I want to say like 4 o'clock, I think, and it's a great view. I love the lineup. The settings are pretty basic: 70 to 300 lens, 100 ISO, probably 150 on the shutter speed. And you just look for the foreground. This happened to be a tugboat, and that's it. It's a great spot to shoot.
It is a great spot to shoot, but there is no parking down there. So you risk getting a ticket. We have all been asked to leave from there. So you take your chances on that one, but for the most part, they're pretty reasonable if you get in and you get out.
Another thing to add about this location, you'll see it in kind of other images throughout, is you're not going to see this with your eye. So probably the Statue of Liberty looks this small, and the Freedom Tower, whatnot, probably looks just a bit larger. So I think you just need to keep that into consideration when if you do go to a location like this. This is probably around 6 miles away. So you absolutely need a telephoto lens and a sturdy tripod in order to get the shot you want and the compression that you want from this.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going to show some other photos in a minute from that location, and you can't get this with your iPhone. So you definitely want to have a telephoto. 600 is probably, somewhere between 400 and 600. And it does get really windy down there. I was down there a couple of weeks ago. The wind, it's right on New York Harbor. If you look to your right, you'll see the Verrazano Bridge, and the wind comes off the water. It could be very, very windy down there, so you want to have a really stable setup. Gina.
Yes. Okay. This was taken from Liberty Island. From down on the ground. Again, you're not allowed tripods there either. So a lot of things I do, I have to do handheld because we do a lot of walking. I take public transportation, I don't drive. So I can't carry these monster tripods. So I don't bring big zoom lenses with me. I use a lot of primes. I use a 90 millimeter and I use a 25 millimeter mostly. So if you stand under her with a 90 millimeter, you'll get a good shot like this, but you gotta get lucky to get this type of a sky. you have to go when it's late because you're not allowed on the island, I don't think after 5 or something like that, I don't remember what it is. But, yeah, I had this about 2.8 on this one, and maybe like, could be 320 I don't remember exactly the setting. But if you go there, you have to stand right below her with at least a 90 to get something like this. And like you say, you have to look out at the sky. You can't plan this.
All right, great.
Thanks.
So Kareem,
Yes. So this again is in the same location, well, similar, in the same area of Bill's photo. I think it's just a bit slightly north on Port Jersey Boulevard. And over here, and it's really interesting, I'll be completely honest with you, because a lot of times I think a few of us have advertised or posted a shot like this, and people would say, well, did you Photoshop this? Because there's absolutely no way that the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building and 432 Park line up. I was born, I was raised in New York City, I've lived here all my life, I've never seen this. Well, yes, it's very difficult to see with the naked eye unless you are 6 miles out in a very remote location of Port Jersey Boulevard, which not a lot of people are familiar with. So you will see, again, it really has to do with the distance where you're able to get this, well, you're able to get this alignment and just the compression involved with the Empire State Building actually looking as close as it is to the Statue of Liberty. So what I love about this location is essentially the lineup that you get with the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, and of course 432 Park Avenue. I personally love the simplicity of 432 Park Avenue. A lot of people call it a soulless building in the center of New York City, just this stick figure that's there. But it's actually grown to me quite a bit, and it just adds, it adds a nice dimension to the New York skyline. Another thing to quickly add is the New York skyline is just ever changing. And there's always new structures, new architecture that's building. And right now, with Hudson Yards and these absolutely modern buildings, and so I'm very excited in a good, year, 2 years, 3 years, the kind of images that we're going to be able to get with the evolved skyline.
so just to clarify, so we're standing 2 miles away from the Statue of Liberty in this shot, and then the Empire State Building is another 5 miles behind that. So you're seeing 7 miles of compressed distance here. Kareem was being nice. When we post these photos on Facebook or Instagram, we take so much shit from people because they all swear, I live in New York my whole life, that it doesn't line up. It must be Photoshop. I've actually taken people, haters off Facebook, I take them to the spot for a fee and show them how they can get this shot. All right, so this is not Photoshop, this is an actual alignment that you can get. Max?
Okay, so this was obviously the sun setting through the Brooklyn Bridge, and there's a silhouette of the Statue of Liberty with some people, doing the same thing I'm doing, but from the other bridge. This one was taken from the Manhattan Bridge, and I've been going there recently because the sun actually has been setting through the Brooklyn Bridge, so I've been trying to capture this shot again, and this was taken with a telephoto lens, so you're not. This is, it doesn't look this close when you're on the Manhattan Bridge. And the Manhattan Bridge is one of my favorite places to take photos from because, you have views of, obviously, these two icons, but of Brooklyn Bridge Park, you have the World Trade in Lower Manhattan. And if you're on this is taken from the pedestrian side. If you're on the side that, for bikes, you see the Empire State Building and views of the Chrysler. And there's also really cool shots of, some rooftops that have graffiti on them, and some really cool street shots and angles of Chinatown down East Broadway. One of my favorite places is to go for the Chinese New Year is to go on this bridge, and you see the parade coming right under you, and it's a great place to be. And yeah, that's about it.
Great.
So if you've never, oh, sorry.
Funny you should mention that shot of Chinatown.
Yeah.
It's coming up.
Oh God.
All right, so this is another one of my shots. This is a full moon. This is the Moonrise. This was taken from the Jersey City area. It's actually an older photo, but it's one that I really love. So the thing with the moon is the moon comes up in a different location pretty much every night. All right, so there are apps that tell us where the moon is going to rise, where it's going to set, and we use those apps to track the trajectory of the moon. And so there are great locations depending on when and where it's coming up in Jersey City, and then it flips around for moon set. You have to be in Brooklyn, occasionally Lower Manhattan, to get different alignments from there. So again, I teach this. If anybody's interested in doing this, see me afterwards. I have some workshops coming up next week. We have a full moon, and there's a lot of information out there now. We started doing this, my friend Frank and I and some of our friends, we started doing this several years ago, and now everybody's doing it, which is fine. But these are still really unique and compelling photos. And I've traveled, I've been to South America, I've been to the Middle East, I've been to the Indian Ocean with these photos. Everybody around the world, they don't speak English, but they know the Statue of Liberty. It has some real significance for them. You know, it's recognized around the world, and photos like this help sell it even more.
So this is my shot from the legal location, and which is the Teardrop Memorial Park. The only reason why I went there and not the spot that Bill was mentioning is because I honestly didn't know where it was. This is a sunrise, and like Peter had mentioned, there was probably about 40-mile-an-hour winds this morning. It was 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and I couldn't feel my fingers, and I was trying to operate a 500-millimeter lens, which was really tough. So just keeping that big lens and camera stable on a tripod is hard enough, but especially the longer focal length you use, the more shake impacts your final photo. So I would say out of maybe 100 photos I took this day, maybe 2 of them were usable. So I'm really glad I got something. One thing that I focus on a lot with my images is the lighting. So my favorite exact moment, and from my understanding and experience, it lasts for about 1 to 2 minutes each day, is when you get both light and then you can also see the lights in the building. So it's a very quick, fleeting moment, but that's always when I shoot. So you're able to see just a bit of the sunrise light hitting the Statue of Liberty. You can see the torches still lit. And mainly because I had to jack up my ISO to get a fast enough shutter speed so that it wouldn't be blurry, I was able to capture some birds as well. And those are all real, it's not Photoshop.
And what time of day is that, do you think, Jason?
I woke up, I think, around 3:30 in the morning. I'm from Brooklyn, so I don't have a car. I had to rent a zip car to get here. This was probably around 6 a.m. So
That's
it's quite
dedication, guys. Freezing cold.
I had a
Brooklyn with a zip car.
Yeah, so unfortunately for me to go to spots like this, it's typically a bit of an investment. So I was really glad I got one shot out of it.
And speaking of this location,
It's the same thing as both Karina and Billy. This was in Bayonne, New Jersey. I had to use a really heavy tripod with a long exposure, maybe about 400 millimeters lens with the
Remote.
Shutter release.
remote, the
Oh,
remote
shutter release.
Oh, no wind. There wasn't any because you can't shoot it with wind. So I think I set up 9/15 to 20 seconds, and then I was happy with that shot.
And just to add with the remote shutter, really glad you mentioned that. In windy situations, or even when you want to avoid any sort of camera shake when you're on a tripod, it always helps to have a wireless remote shutter so that your finger kind of on the button doesn't cause additional shake that you may want to avoid. I mean, you can also use it without a wireless remote. You can put your kind of shutter on a maybe couple second timer so that when you click, you know, the shake will stop and then it'll shoot. But always good to have. It's nice to have whether wireless or wired shutter, one or the other. remote.
And even
for
to
your
mention, to go further into that, sometimes a slight movement with a telephoto lens, if you press the camera, you can slightly move it, and that might shift where your camera is focusing. So particularly if you're using a lot of zoom, any movement in the camera could be potentially devastating to your final image. So to the extent that you need to tweak anything, a remote shutter is the way to go on that front.
Okay.
If you don't have a remote shutter, do a 5-second delay, which is what I've been doing recently because my remote broke.
All right, so the new One World Trade Center, I happen to love this building. Obviously, it'll never replace what we lost on 9/11. But I do feel, for me personally, and I know there's some different opinions on that, it has really become, for me, one of the centerpieces that I love to photograph in New York City. And I think we all have a passion for this building, as hopefully you'll see in our photos.
So this shot is from Fulton Street, and it's a shot that I got recently that I had seen a lot, but I hadn't personally taken myself. And so when I got to the street, I walked all the way up and then all the way back, trying different angles to see which shot would come out the best for me or for what I wanted to achieve. And I like the shot because, obviously because of the lineup, but I like the contrast between the light and the dark on this. And it's always interesting to see the people in the foreground. If you spend some time here, you get a person crossing the street, perfectly set up for the shot. And that's what I was trying to achieve that day, but I didn't have the luck. But if I were to go back, that's what I would be trying to get here. I also think that this shot, probably at sunrise or sunset, the light coming from the left or the right would also add to this. I think this was kind of midday, or it was a little overcast that day. But it's a great spot to shoot. And if you go there, just go to Fulton Street and just walk up and down. There's so many areas to shoot.
Gina, what's up here?
Okay, this was taken from Brooklyn Bridge Park. I'm inspired by Marvel Comics a lot with my photos. Gotham, anything Gotham looking, I love to do. So what I do is, when I go home to process them, I'll really put the highlights down so the clouds like really pop, and I'll mess around with the clarity, and I'll do a little dodging and burning in certain spots, because I do, it's let's see what else I did here. And then like where the sun was, I dodged it a little more so it got brighter. And in the dark spots, I would burn the water a little bit. And this is in Brooklyn Bridge Park. If you walk,
That's actually the Manhattan Bridge, right, that we're looking through?
yes, if you walk on the other side of the Manhattan Bridge, there's a certain spot there that you'll get that right between. And I never knew it existed. I just walked around and I was like, oh, look at that. I didn't even know that that was there. But that's about it. It's a cool alignment.
There is a walkway that goes through Brooklyn Bridge Park, and then you go under the Manhattan Bridge, and just north of the Manhattan Bridge, the walkway kind of curves back towards the water, and you get that alignment.
All right. So this is another long exposure. This probably, I would say, is around 60 seconds. Usually, well, not sure, depends on the camera, but usually kind of the maximum you can actually go in camera for the timer is 30 seconds. And so with this, you kind of have to either put it on timer mode or bulb mode in order to be able to extend the shutter to the additional seconds that you want to extend it. Absolutely used a wireless remote here as well to avoid any sort of shake. Now, this was taken last, I would probably say, kind of around the holiday time last year. If you notice in front of you, there's kind of Brookfield Place, if I'm not mistaken, and there's a pier right outside of it where you, and why it's really cool in the winter is because that's when all the boats are not there. And so you actually can walk along on the pier and set up, and so you get the beautiful reflections of of the Freedom Tower as well as its surrounding area. And once again, with the long exposure, you get the movement of the water and the clouds here. So love this look up, and I think I'd like to concur with Peter as well, where the Freedom Tower is probably my favorite building to shoot in New York. And the reason why is because my favorite type of shooting is during sunrise and sunset. And there can always, depending on where you are, but the reflections that you get from the sun, whether it's during sunrise or sunset on the Freedom Tower, and the additional light that reflects from it is absolutely beautiful when you're able to capture that. So definitely enjoy photographing this structure.
Mark's got a rainbow.
Yes,
Yeah.
double.
Yeah.
So this photo was taken from the park that I work for, which I mentioned. It's on the west side of Manhattan, from Chambers to 59th Street, and this was on Pier 45, and which is also known as Christopher Street Pier. It leads at the end of the street, and for I was probably chasing lightning this day, but I don't think I got any strikes, but I was fortunate enough to get this awesome rainbow over Lower Manhattan and over 56 Leonard, and I love how it reflects in the water here. And I know probably Peter was over on the Jersey side getting the rainbow over Manhattan, but this hits home for me since I live across the street from this spot, so I really like this image.
And again, just for reference, so we're on the Hudson River looking south from, what's the pier again?
Pier 45, which is right in the West Village. Yeah, but a lot of people get it mixed up with you're looking across the water. They think it's from New Jersey, but this is part of the piers that run along my park I work for.
Yes.
All right, and I caught a rainbow too. So this was taken from, I don't know if it was the same day, but this was taken from Liberty State Park. So one of the things that we do a lot of is storm chasing. We watch the weather. So when there's a weather system coming through New York City, we set up and we wait. And one of the things we often get, if we don't get the lightning, which hopefully we will, afterwards we're often greeted by a rainbow. So I've gotten, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten 5 or 6 complete rainbows over the city, and then a bunch of partial rainbows too. This was a long exposure. I think it was about 20 seconds. And the thing about when you're in Liberty State Park or anywhere in Jersey, the sun is setting behind you, and it's lighting up the skyline from behind you, so you get this amazing glow on the buildings. That's the actual sun setting behind me.
So I think this photo is pretty indicative of my style of photography, where I try to shoot cityscapes with more of like a landscape orientation. So the thing that drew me in, this is another sunrise from New Jersey, Morris Canal State Park, were these rocks. So I kind of try to look at my photos in terms of layers, so focus on foreground, midground, and background interest, and ultimately give the viewer's eyes a direction as to where I want them to focus. So ultimately, I got into a point with these rocks where it led you into the background of the image. So I try to focus on composition a lot when I shoot. Unfortunately, this was a winter morning, and to get this angle, I was about shin deep in the water. I did not have proper shoes on. I was wearing running shoes. So this was another instance where I lost feeling in my toes and my fingers, and it was a generally miserable morning. I remember showing up in a Dunkin' Donuts just dripping wet, and everybody was confused. But again, this kind of shows how I focus on particularly the timing of when I take my shots. It's when the lights of the buildings are still on, and you're starting to see some color in the sky. And that's ultimately the moment that I'm pressing the shutter. All right.
Vic.
Oh, and Vic.
I don't remember. Oh wait, I was standing in in Newport, New Jersey, in Jersey City area. I think it was during the sunset. Oh no, it's sunrise. Yeah. I think I set up 30-second /99, and I was using the remote. There was too many clouds, so I didn't really get a sunrise. But then I had the World Trade Center behind it, and I like the nice contrast, even with the clouds.
So this is a great spot in Newport, which is just north of Jersey City. There's a lighthouse there called the Lefrak Lighthouse. I don't know if it's actually functional or not, but it's actually nice to capture in your photos. And there's this odd, I don't know what, breakwater, I don't know what that thing is, but it creates a really nice leading line into lower Manhattan from that area. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about just photographing in the city itself. Bill.
So last winter, I had been wanting to get a shot in Central Park from the facade of Terrace for the longest time, and so I braved the drive into the city. Well, I probably shouldn't have driven because my car was fishtailing everywhere. I found a spot to park, illegally, I might add, and then I walked over to the park, and the person in the picture was actually another photographer. I can't remember who it was at this moment, but he had an umbrella, and so I was like, hey, can you please stand there because I think this will make a great comp. So there's a shot. This spot is so great because you have the fountain on the one side and you have the stairs behind you going up. So there's many different comps you can get from here. After the shot, with my freezing hands and feet, I walked over by where all the rows of seats are and got the shots there and some of the lamps there. But the beautiful thing about here is the ceiling of the facade of Terrace, and you can see the intricate detail in the patterns there. I like the dark mood that I captured here for this shot.
And this is Bethesda Fountain in front, right?
Correct.
Okay. The area in Central Park.
So this is 46th Street and Times Square. This is handheld, on-the-fly shot because it was raining out. Didn't want to get my gear all wet. Didn't have any protection for it. So I love Times Square when it rains because the way the lights just reflect on the floor is amazing. And anybody with an umbrella I see, I have to shoot in the rain. It's just like something you have to do. And it's just handheld, on the fly. I don't even think I had it on my eye. I just keep it on the hip and shoot as I'm walking because we were getting kind of wet here. But yeah, Times Square is one of my favorite places to shoot in the rain only. I don't like to go there any other time. I hate it there, actually.
So your shutter speed must have been really quick.
It was quick because it's so bright there. Mm-hmm. You can keep it like that handheld. But once like you get out of this area, forget it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work because it's not bright enough. But yeah, it's good. I just don't like to go there any other time. It's too many tourists and it's crazy. But this is good when it rains because people run back to the hotel. They don't like to be out in the street, so you get really nice shots.
All right. So this shot, now mind you, I would like to preface, I actually don't shoot that much in the city. Most is outside of the city. I live in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I absolutely love the New York skyline. So I try to shoot from Jersey City, from Hoboken, New Jersey, which also has a beautiful view, from Weehawken, and then the other side we have Brooklyn, that kind of gives us a nice, Brooklyn and Queens, that gives us nice views. Anyway, but this is, it was from last spring, actually, and again in Central Park, and if you notice Bill's photo, if you see the arches in this building, Bill, your photo was from inside those arches, so this is kind of outside. Bethesda Fountain is not in this image, it's kind of on the right. During this photo, this was actually during a huge Instagram photography meet that was taking place. And it was probably hundreds of people that from Instagram, you know, and people that we know. that met up for this, and we're all kind of walking together, taking the exact same shot, and it got a bit stifling. So I decided actually to kind of meander on my own and explore the park a bit. I walk around a lot in the park. I don't usually shoot it as much. I did have my camera with me at that time, and I found this scene, and it felt very classic to me, with just very, very classic New York in Central Park, with people kind of walking through. The post-processing here, I think you probably notice a bit more detail within this shot. So I used a lot of kind of high dynamic range post-processing here, just to kind of pull out the details a bit. But yeah, Central Park.
And Max didn't have any in the book. He didn't have any shots of Times Square or Central Park, so we got Grand Central Station.
So this photo was taken from a behind-the-scenes little tour of Grand Central Station. My girlfriend actually got me on this tour, so I'm very thankful for her. And this was a unique. On this tour, they told us that a lot of these stairwells were actually open to the public before 9/11, but since since that event happened, they had to really soup up security and not let people just wander around the buildings. But it was really fascinating walking around and seeing the old architecture and being up close to the ceiling, which is it's really hard to get this shot. So. What's that?
Is that legal?
Yeah, it's legal. It's legal.
They do have photo tours. Generally speaking, you're not allowed to use a tripod in Grand Central Station, especially on the ground level. But I think when you're on one of these tours, they give you that option where you can actually use a tripod.
I don't think they do these tours anymore. I've tried to join them. I want this shot, and I haven't been able to get it.
Yeah.
So I'm quite jealous.
Oof,
All right, so
yes.
this is my shot of the Times Square. I just kind of wandered down there one night. I hadn't been down there in years, and this was just a random night in October a year or two ago. And I was just overwhelmed by the humanity, the mass of people there. And I have to say I heard about 15 different dialects and languages, people from all over the world to come to Times Square. This was actually, so there's an aluminum grandstand that goes up, and this was on the top rung of that grandstand. I actually was shooting with a tripod. You can't see it on this shot, but what I wanted was a relatively static shot of the people, but I wanted the taxis to be streaking. I wanted to get some car trails from the taxis, so that's why I was using a tripod. The thing I didn't realize was aluminum bends, so the grandstands were constantly moving from all the people in the grandstand. So I managed to get a couple of good shots that night. But I just love that this takes in the entire, pretty much the entire view of Times Square and just shows the real spirit of it.
So I don't have a single shot of Times Square because it seems like Peter's just overwhelmed me. So I view my photography as very kind of therapeutic, and I like being alone in spots like this in Central Park. So this is a sunrise in Central Park, right next to the Bow Bridge. One of the interesting things to note, if you go at this location for sunset, there's going to be a ton of boats on the water, there's going to be people crossing the bridge, so you can't really get this shot at sunset, so you have to go at sunrise. And knowing that, I purposely went on a day where there will be no clouds along the horizon, so the east horizon, because I wanted the light to reflect off of these buildings and into the foliage and the background of my shot. So that's kind of what I view as my planning when I'm trying to figure out the best time to take an image, is I have like a list of compositions that I'm trying to achieve, and then it's overlaying that with what would be the optimal weather conditions to get that photo. So this one, I was fortunate enough to be able to have some clouds in the background, but thankfully not behind me. So I was able to get the morning light, I was able to get the reflection off the water without being interrupted. I was able to get a shot of the bridge without any people on it. So if you've ever been to this location in Central Park during the daytime, you know just how busy it is. Plus, it didn't hurt that there was, I would say this is early fall, so it believes we're just starting to change colors, but not fully peaked yet.
I live in New Jersey, and I love the winter weather and the snow. Except for New York. No thank you. I can't find parking. It's crazy there. I usually take the train to New Jersey to go to New York and walk around with my equipment, gloves, and everything to keep warm for wintertime. I guess this is where with the NYPD was right there, so I think it was in the morning. I wanted to do a wide lens, something quick, maybe one second or something. So, and it came out beautiful.
All right, so we're going to just highlight some of the bridges. We don't actually have all these bridges in our photos today, but we have all photographed these bridges, and there's additional other bridges as well. Just one of the little things that's great about New York City is some of the older and the newer bridges.
So on this particular day, if you guys don't know, George Washington Bridge, prior to 2018, is lit up on certain holidays. They're currently refurbishing the lights and expected to be lit up again for 2019. On this day, I went to a spot on a trail on the New Jersey side, but we had to leave because the cops were chasing a gunman that day. So, spot is safe, it's legal, but that day, that's what happened. And so I couldn't shoot from there, so I went on the bridge. What I didn't expect was that I was trying to do long exposure, as you see the car trails, but you had to time it. If a truck was coming by, you would feel the bridge vibrate, so that wasn't good for the shot. So I kind of had to just keep shooting until one actually came out kind of sharp. And so that's what I had here on this. So if you've never been there, it's definitely a good thing to walk on the George Washington Bridge and shoot it. You can Google where to park and just walk on there, and you'll see views to the right of the city. And then there's a park on the Jersey side to the right, and there's a trail on the left. And when the bridge is lit up, you should definitely try to get that shot.
Just one word of caution, there is parking at the Fort Lee Historic Center. Park over there closes at dusk, and if you're in there after dusk, you will be ticketed, including you personally and your car. And these lights usually come on at dusk, so it's just really interesting to note that when this building was first designed, the towers were supposed to be completely enclosed in sheet metal, and for whatever reason, they decided at the last minute, I don't know if it was for aerodynamic, for wind, or I don't know why they decided that, but then what they started doing is on national holidays, as Bill said, they illuminate the towers from inside. So it creates these great views.
Okay, so this is the Verrazano Bridge from the Staten Island side, and this is in Fort Wadsworth. This little tunnel that you see here was hidden until 2012 when Sandy hit. And I guess all the erosion or whatever happened, this was unearthed in 2012. And you can actually go inside of it. He goes inside, I won't go. I don't like it in there. What was this, World War I, World War II? I forget.
Civil War, no?
Is it
It
civil?
is Civil War, but I don't think this was built in the Civil War. It was just
This one wasn't, right?
It was before World War I.
World War I. So there's really some cool stuff there if you go there. There's if you go underneath, you can, where these hills are, and if you keep going underneath, there's platforms where they used to keep guns. What are
No,
those?
this is basically a battery.
The
So
battery,
they keep
right?
munitions in there. And there's a huge sand, I mean, she didn't see it, so she can't explain it, but there's a huge
Yeah, I won't
sand
go in.
pile
He goes in.
with
I
a small
won't.
gap. Then you gotta climb up and go through the small gap and down, and it opens up into some more corridors.
Into some more corridors.
But,
So
it's not much in there.
yeah, so this is at Sunrise. So since we live in Staten Island, it's pretty easy for us to get to. So we'll go once in a while. And I shot this on a tripod, and I think I used my 25 millimeter at maybe 2.0, or maybe more. I can't remember the settings offhand, but yeah, this is Verrazano Bridge Sunrise, and like I said, if you go there, you can really find these cool military tunnels and stuff. They're really cool to look at.
Oh, that's mine. Another long exposure. This was probably, I actually remember this perfectly. This was probably 120 second exposure, which is 2 minutes. And so this is actually a classic scene from the Brooklyn Bridge Park, once again. Brooklyn Bridge Park is quite large if you haven't been. However, so beautiful to walk because there's so many different very picturesque areas and views that you can capture. So if you recall a couple of photos ago, Gina's Manhattan Bridge with the alignment of the Freedom Tower, same park, right? Just a different area. So a lot of great stuff. This was taken during sunset, and the clouds were absolutely beautiful. The color was absolutely beautiful. And once again, one of the things that I love to capture is just movement of the surrounding areas of the skyline. And wow, this came out nice. So, or I hope it did. But this is it.
Next, I think I skipped yours. Oh, there it is.
Yes.
Yeah, so this was taken right by the seaport, and I really love this shot because obviously the red umbrella and the red railing sticks out when it's covered in snow, and this was taken obviously from Lower Manhattan, so Brooklyn is kind of hidden from the shot because of the snowfall. But yeah, this was taken underneath the FDR, so right here, how it's not covered in snow, I have a little protection, and it's a great place to shoot when it's either raining or snowing, because you kind of have some overhead protection. And
Love the red.
Yeah, it
Like
matches the
very
railing.
pop of red.
Now, Max, did you plan that shot?
no, actually, this person was walking with a red umbrella,
Wow.
so
That's awesome.
I had no
That's
idea.
good. bird,
That's
too?
good karma, guys.
I had no
Yes.
idea who this person was or anything.
Little seagull up there.
All right, so this is my shot. This is a photograph taken from the Manhattan Bridge walkway. So you may know Manhattan Bridge and Brooklyn Bridge kind of parallel, well, not really, but they run from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So I was up on the walkway of the Manhattan Bridge looking south, photographing Lower Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge in the foreground. As Max mentioned earlier, the Manhattan Bridge, let's just say it shakes a lot. So they have subway trains that go over that bridge, they have car and truck traffic, and so you have to time if you're using a tripod. This was I think about a 20-second exposure. You can see the water is smooth and the clouds are moving a little bit. I had to time it between the subway trains passing behind me and the trucks passing behind me and all of that. A lot of the shots didn't come out as well. So keep that in mind. It's also loud as hell up there, so bring some earplugs. When the trains go by especially, it's an old cast iron bridge, so but it's really a cool spot. The bridge span itself is almost 2 miles, and there is, on the pedestrian side, there is a cyclone fence, but people have made holes in the fence, so you can actually get your camera lens through a hole in the fence, which is how I did this one.
They
And it
just
actually-
covered all the posts. They repaired all the fences.
Oh, did they now?
Yeah, I almost scared.
They repair them, but then other people come along and
gonna
make
be
They
them
get
coming
better.
out
opened
of
up
them
pretty quickly again.
Yeah. I mean, beautiful views from that bridge, though. People have a tendency to walk the Brooklyn Bridge a lot because it's above the cars and you see kind of your entire, it's packed. Manhattan Bridge may not be as fun to walk, but it's less crowded and you actually have better compositions to grab when it comes to photography, in my opinion, so worth it.
All right, so this is another one of my shots. Unfortunately, this evening, it's another one in the Brooklyn Bridge Park area. So it's obviously one of the top New York City spots. If you want to go for a day trip to take some photos, I would highly recommend it. Unfortunately, I didn't get a great sunset this evening, so I stuck around and waited for blue hour. So one of the things that I liked about this photo, as I mentioned, there's a lot of elements to it. So there's a foreground element with the rocks kind of leading your eye into the next element, which is the bridge and the carousel. I was timing the shot because the carousel would spin, and then you have about a minute where it doesn't. So I was trying to get it where it was sharp that you can see the lights. And then kind of the bridge does its job to bring your eye into the Manhattan skyline. So this is another one where I try to focus on layers in my image and my composition. Unfortunately, it wasn't perfect lighting, but it was just kind of a classic New York scene that I liked.
That's one of the things actually that I love about Jason's work is that his composition is he always has a stark foreground, a midground, and then a background which kind of leads your eye very nicely, and he uses the rules of thirds just beautifully. So good stuff.
I didn't pay her to say that.
No, you didn't. I wanted to
Thank you.
wanted to mention that.
Vic?
This is George Washington Bridge. I have they have two different sides there. This is the north side, I think.
Correct. Yep. North
Yeah,
side.
it's on. And you can walk into the park over there during the nighttime with a long exposure, maybe about 30 seconds. And you can get the cars starting to drive back and forth. It's really cool how, with the clouds in the background at the top, how it looks like it's moving. And I think this was summertime, actually. I think it was in summer.
Well, you can see the leaves on the trees, so.
Yeah, it's summertime, hello.
Yeah.
All right, and so just to clarify, there's the Fort Lee Historic Park on the south side of Route 80, and then on the north side, which is where this photo was taken from, there's a little, I don't know if it's a running trail or there's something, you have to go around the north side, there's stairs that you go up, and then there's a break in the trees, which, this is the Palisades, it goes straight down from here, so be careful. But there is a break in the trees where you get this really nice view of the George Washington Bridge. Don't go alone and bring a flashlight.
Yeah,
There's no
careful
lights
with
up
the
there.
rock, it's very dangerous.
Yeah. All right, so street photography. Now, I don't think any of us are street photographers per se, so the criteria for this is if there's a street in it, it's street photography.
So this spot, I'm sure you've all seen this spot. It's Tudor Bridge. It's an iconic lineup with the street here, and it's great when it's raining. It's great when the sun lines up. It's a great spot for Manhattan Hedge. And if any of you, I haven't tried it yet because it gets so packed. And actually, this past year, the spot was bought out by some company, so photographers couldn't even shoot the Manhattan Hedge on the day of it. But I rarely shoot people. I really stick to landscape and architecture. But I thought that the bike riders here was pretty cool, so I took this shot as they were all coming by. And this is probably like in the afternoon, probably like in November, December. And it's just a great spot to visit. And I would highly recommend that you also can go down steps and shoot from the middle of the ground. Put the camera right in between the yellow lines, and you have a great point of view there. Obviously, you should have a spotter. You don't want to go there with the cars going by, but it makes a great shot from the street as well.
So this is 42nd Street. We're looking west on 42nd Street. You can see the Chrysler building up there. And this is Tudor Place. It's a kind of a bridge that goes over. It's in Tudor City by the UN. It's a nightmare to park over there, but you get some great shots from up there.
Okay, this is Doyer Street in Chinatown. It's one of my favorite streets in Manhattan. This was a night that it started to snow a little bit. And the best time, I think, to go there is at night because there's nobody there. If you go there on a weekend, forget it. You can't even walk. And now I don't like what they did here in the summer. They've set up like tables and chairs, and to me, it takes away like the authenticity of the place. They turned it into like Dumbo, and it's starting to annoy me a little bit. But this we did on tripods, again with the 25 millimeter. I don't remember the settings. Like I said, I don't even pay attention. I just, whatever looks good, I do. And let's see, when was this? I think this was like right before Christmas last year. And again, it's kind of like, to me, Marvel Comics, like I could picture like Batman up there or something. And that really inspires me, it really does.
I love the blue hour, the blue of the sky that's contrasting. It's like the cool against the warmth.
The warmth of the
It's
buildings.
beautiful. Ah, yes. So I don't think it's the typical scene that you see. I don't do a lot of street photography, but when I kind of really first began delving into photography, I would walk around the city and get a lot of inspiration from there. So this is actually the Chrysler Building. So I'm right in front of the Chrysler Building, looking straight up at it. So it's a look-up shot of the Chrysler, and then I love the reflection of it, kind of in the adjacent building, and of course the sky and the clouds. So actually, it's a simple shot that I took, but turned out to be an interesting composition. So, yeah. Yes.
This photo was taken from the Manhattan Bridge during Chinese New Year celebrations, and it's East Broadway. And what I love about this street is that the facades of the buildings, you know, it kind of looks like another country. You know, it brings you to it. It makes you feel like you're in another place. And yeah. So again, this was taken from the Manhattan Bridge, and it's awesome seeing the floats and the dragons come down, and people are shooting off confetti in the streets. And normally you can see the World Trade at the top, but it was kind of an overcast day. You can see some people holding umbrellas. So that wasn't in the shot, but it created a nice black on the pavement because of, you know, the wet ground.
And was there a hole in the fence?
Yes, this was shot through one of the holes in the fence, definitely.
So this is literally the walkway of the Manhattan Bridge. As it comes into Manhattan, it gets lower and lower, and you can actually see this is Chinatown. This is a great shot at night too, for anybody who's interested. There's another one of mine. This is a long exposure. I think this is about 20 or 30 seconds. That's the Flatiron Building. This is 5th Avenue facing south. They have since changed the traffic pattern a little bit, so I don't think you can actually get in the street where I was for this. And what I like about it is the cab. You see the cab waiting at the light, and then when it leaves that streak. So I got my car trails. You look up to the left, it's actually the full moon and the Flatiron Building.
So this was what was the exposure on this? The shutter?
It was about 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
20 to 30 seconds. That's the great thing about NYC. You get buses, you get cabs, and they have all kinds of lights on them. And when you do a car trail, you get some really cool effects.
All right. So this is one of my Manhattan's Hedge types of shots. Is that taken at the same location as Bill's? So one of my favorite times to go and shoot Manhattan Hedge is actually not the right day. It's normally crowded and packed. I've done it almost every year anyway, but yeah, it's really tough to get the shot. I actually prefer it. So in like the few weeks after Manhattan Hedge, you'll get it so that the sun still sets through the 42nd Street in this instance, but not directly in between them. And I really like that. I mean, one thing to note about this shot, what ultimately draws my eye, is just waiting for the right moment, and that's when the guy walked out in the middle of the street to take his photo. That's definitely my favorite instance of it. So, you know, being able to find the right moment and take the photo then is important. In terms of technical on this one, staring a mirrorless camera directly at the sun will destroy your sensor. So make sure to keep your lens covered. On a DSLR, you have a mirror there that's kind of blocking it, but if you're shooting on a mirrorless camera, you could do a lot of harm. I personally shoot on a Fuji, so definitely like take a hat with you or put something over your lens and get your shot framed and set up, and then remove that item and take the photo and cover it back up because it could destroy your camera.
Does everybody know what Manhattan Hedge is? Manhattan Henge is when the sun sets along the street grid in New York. It's named after Stonehenge in England, and there's this whole idea that Stonehenge is some kind of an ancient calendar, that when the sun aligns with the slabs of rock, it told them when to plant or harvest or whatever. So we have nothing else to do in New York City, so we come up with these.
So it happens twice in New York,
twice a year.
One, and it's 2 times. So like it'll happen like twice in May and I think twice in July. One where the sun sets fully in the middle of the street, and one where half the sun sets directly over those trees in the background. So you have the opportunity to take a photo of it in between those 2 days, so in between May and July, and that's when this is probably taken in June sometime. But getting a spot and getting good weather is normally very difficult, so I recommend going and checking out a few days after Manhattan Henge for the best result.
This is my favorite picture for the holidays. There's World Trade Center.
Oculus?
Oculus.
At Westfield Mall, I think, Westfield Mall area. Yeah. I wasn't allowed to bring a tripod, so I just had to use my camera on to hold it down, and then just take a quick picture. It was fast. No remote, nothing, only with my hands. I like all the people and the colors and the architecture and how it looks busy during the Christmas season.
So again, this is the Oculus in Lower Manhattan. This was on 9/11. The subway station down there and the path and everything was destroyed. So they've reimagined it, they've rebuilt it, and this is a really favorite place for a lot of us photographers.
And just beautiful over the holidays, so festive. So if you haven't had a chance to kind of see it over the holiday time, definitely recommend you do.
All right, so to wrap it up, we're going to take a look at some aerial shots of New York City. Most of us have done helicopter flights over Manhattan. It's really cool, especially if you've been in New York your whole life and you've never seen it from above. I really recommend it, especially if you're a photographer. We have to take the doors off when we fly over New York City to avoid any glare on the glass on the inside. So all the shots that you see from the helicopter have doors off. Sometimes we go in the winter. It's pretty exciting.
Oh, okay. This isn't from a helicopter. This is actually from the Manhattan Bridge. I'm not a flyer. I have never been up in a helicopter, and I don't plan on going up. So I don't like them. So this is as high as I go, unless I can get access to a rooftop. But this is on the Manhattan Bridge. If you stand there over Chinatown, you can get some really cool stuff. And this is, let's see, what street would this probably be? I don't know.
It's from the Manhattan Bridge.
Yeah, it's from the Manhattan Bridge. I'm not sure of the exact street. But if you go up on the bridge, you'll see like things that you don't see normally in the street. Water tanks, chimneys, people have clothes hanging up on clotheslines, which you don't find anymore because I think it's illegal to do now in Manhattan. And then all the graffiti, if you not really process it like an HDR, but I didn't do an HDR on this one, but if you step up the clarity a little bit and play with the colors, you get a really nice graffiti picture.
And I love the juxtaposition between kind of the new in the background with the Freedom Tower and then
right?
just the old
all this stuff.
East Village vibe.
It's cool.
Yes. So this was taken from a helicopter over. It was actually during sunrise, and I just want to preface by saying I have an intense fear of heights. So usually from the time we take off to when we actually reach over the city, it's probably around 6 to 8 minutes because the airports that we take off from are in Jersey for the most part. So for the first 8 minutes in, I'm literally having an anxiety attack, no joke. And as soon as we get closer to the city, just I'm in awe. And the fear in a sense dissipates, which is beautiful. So with this, we kind of among the photography group call it a money shot just because of the symmetry that's involved. This is right over Central Park, looking south onto Central Park, and then so you see 432 Park Avenue there, kind of on the left, and then the Freedom Tower all the way at the end. Now, I probably, in order to get this shot and to get kind of this lineup, because keep in mind you're in a helicopter, it's shaking, it's moving, I probably have to get probably around 40, 50 shots to actually get one that was sharp, that was well aligned. And when you're shooting at that altitude as well, significantly colder, the wind is always a factor. Even on a still day, you have wind up there. And so in terms of how you shoot, you have to have a very, very quick shutter when you're up there, in addition to a relatively higher ISO than usual, right, in order to be able to kind of capture the light that you need to capture. So yeah.
This is from a helicopter, and it was at the final colors of sunset, and we were flying over World Trade, and they also call this another one of the money shots, you know. And yeah, I really like this photo because I grew up on the Hudson River my whole life, and you know, this kind of encompasses it, you know, with the World Trade and the Statue of Liberty and all these. I went to middle school and high school down here in the financial district, so this photo means a lot to me. And yeah, I did have to take it at shutter speed that was not too dark, but you know, still enough. Still, I can still capture some of the, you know, the sunset and.
Did you use a prime lens for this? Or was it
No, this is on my 17 to 55.
Okay.
I like how you even got the little Colgate clock there.
Yeah, the Colgate clock. Absolutely. Beautiful. Yes.
All right, so this is one of my shots. This shot was actually taken a couple of years ago. We're not currently able to get this photograph. Our president has a residence over in Manhattan, and so we're not actually allowed to fly over Midtown. You could fly pretty much up to about 23rd Street, and then you have to go back over the East River and go back over the Hudson, over the East River, Central Park, and then come down the Hudson. So this was, I forget what the colors were for. It's a little grainy close up because I was shooting at ISO 12,800. At night, you need a fast lens. It was probably 1.4 lens. My shutter was probably at least 1/100th, maybe more. And to get that kind of exposure, to get that kind of shutter, I needed to have a higher ISO. So, but it's a shot you can't get from anywhere else but from the helicopter. It was in February. It was freezing cold that night. We had, as I said, we had the doors off, and it's quite a ride.
So, unlike everybody here, I'm too cheap to pay for a helicopter ride. So, that's like a cost of a lens. I'd rather have a lens. So this was taken from a rooftop on the west side of Manhattan. So this is kind of follows one of my rules, is that if there's no clouds and the sun's at your back, I try to typically focus on the light hitting the buildings, mainly because there's not going to be any light in the sky afterwards, and I'd rather have the light in my image. So this was it's on 37th Street looking east. And one of the amazing things I loved about this was I remember being up on this rooftop, and just every minute the light was just changing. So it's like I really like how in certain areas it's quite dark, in other areas it's quite bright, and then there's this like gradual gradient in the light of the sky. So it's really a simple image, but it was just like really nice and warm, and it was a good feeling. It's a good memory of a nice evening. So it's definitely one of my favorites.
That was in a helicopter. I I tend to be addicted to the helicopter rides. I know they're expensive, but I like them. This was the winter time, obviously. And from the ground, you get a different view. That's from the top. Let me remember. It was 10 degrees, and up in the helicopter it was probably like negative 30. You get a different view, and so it was. We were frozen. Gloves. They weren't really successful with gloves either. So the doors were open or off. I think it was sunrise time. Low ISO, quick shutter, 1 to 100. Most people don't like helicopters with the door closed, but I always want them open. So, yeah,
Beautiful. Such a great shot.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite shots. I love this shot. And this is coming in, if you fly out of, as Kareem mentioned, most of the airports are in Jersey. So you fly in either over the Hudson or you come in over New York Harbor. And you go over the Statue of Liberty first, and then you come around, you go over Governor's Island, and you get this beautiful view of Lower Manhattan. Really breathtaking. And finally, Bill's aerial shot.
So I've been on a helicopter 3 times so far, and I didn't submit any for this, but if you follow my Instagram, you've seen some of the heli rides, and luckily I didn't have to pay for any of them, except for the first one. So that was helpful, or else I would not have any shots. This particular shot is from from Newport, and you have the Verizon in the background, and I was trying to bribe this bird to take my camera up, but it didn't work out. So, but the bokeh in the shot, I kind of really like the way it just, the shimmer of the sun in the background just made for a nice composition.
Amazing depth.
All right, so now it's time for your questions, guys. If you guys don't have questions for them, I have some questions for them, but let's start. Go ahead.
When you shoot from Battery Park, and if you're shooting a full moon, shooting Statue of Liberty, what's the lens you should do?
Length?
Like
A lens?
Focal length.
Okay, so the question was, if you're photographing Statue of Liberty with the moon setting, so if you're in Battery Park or in Brooklyn, you're usually catching the moon set. And so one of the locations is Battery Park. The focal length for those shots is generally between 300 and 600. Generally speaking, I wouldn't shoot it with less than that.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Have any of you photographed the Mandarin duck in Central Park?
No, not yet.
Do you know where he's hanging out, where we can get him?
I think we're the only photographers in New York that haven't photographed that.
Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know, Central Park, there was a mandarin, there was some exotic duck that has been hanging out there in the lake for the last week or two. And people were just going crazy over photographing this duck, so.
I hear he has his own agent now.
He has his own agent, and he's booking engagements. I saw a funny photo, somebody dressed their dog in the same costume that looked like the duck. Other questions?
I was going to ask, when the guy was taking the pictures of the street of Times Square when it was wet, she said she literally shoots from her head, and she uses a very fast exposure. What is a fast exposure? Like, how fast do you talk?
We're going to ask her when she comes back.
Okay.
Save that question.
I can answer that if you want.
Oh, you can?
Well, maybe Gina wants to.
Oh, sorry.
So wait till she comes
You could both answer when Gina comes back.
I'm just curious, how many of you use mirrorless cameras?
Who shoots mirrorless?
Who shoots mirrorless?
Gina. So I shoot a Fuji X-T2. It's actually crop sensor, so it's not even full frame. I love it. It has amazing color output. I used to shoot a Nikon D750, and I really went to the Fuji just because it's way more, it's a lot lighter. And for me, going far places with a big camera bag sometimes I just left lenses at home just because I didn't feel like carrying them. And going to a mirrorless, everything was lighter and smaller, so I'm now more inclined to bringing things with me. So.
Gina, you're mirrorless too, right?
Yes.
A7 III?
A7R2.
R2. So anybody who's not familiar, we have the digital SLRs, which is a single lens reflex from the old days. It has a mirror that flips up and down, take a picture. All the new cameras are now mirrorless. They've taken that mirror out. I was shooting with Canon until recently. Now I'm shooting with Nikon DSLRs. I've looked at I actually love the Z7. I love the way it feels, love the way it looks and all that, but it has one thing that's not going to work for me. I'm not going to get into that now, but the new Canon EOS R is beautiful. The Sony mirrorless cameras are great, and I've heard a lot of great things about the Fuji X-T2, X-T3. They're really a viable option now. In the old days, there was an issue with autofocus performance. There was an issue with, I don't know, whatever. But they've really caught up in terms of performance, at least, equal to what you get from a DSLR.
So I'm not affiliated with Fuji in any way, but there's a Fuji store near Madison Square Park, where if you go there, you leave your ID with them, and they'll let you rent the camera for free for the day. So it's definitely worth checking out.
So what is the pros and cons between the two? Like, because I've been hearing mirrorless.
So one of the things that my Nikon didn't have that my mirrorless camera does have is focus peaking. So it tells you, it outlines everything in the photo in whatever color you choose that's in focus. So sometimes when I was using a DSLR, I would have to take a photo and then zoom in to see if things were in focus. Now I just know. Another thing is I'm able to see my exposure directly through the eye finder. So sometimes when you're getting a photo set up with the DSLR, you take the photo and then you're like, oh man, I was overexposed or underexposed, and you've since missed the moment. But right now I can pick up my camera, look through it. I mean, a lot of times it's on a tripod, but I'm able to see exactly what the photo would look like on the screen, and it's really helpful for me.
So the electronic viewfinder.
Yeah, the electronic.
SLRs, I mean, I think some of the newer SLRs now do have focus peaking as well.
Yeah, so I know the Nikon D850 has it. I'm not sure what other cameras do, but going from the Nikon to my Fuji, I couldn't imagine now going back.
Was it hard for you to adjust from going from a Canon to a Nikon?
It's a nightmare. I've just been shooting for the last 2 weeks just to practice. Because a lot of what I do is at night, in the dark, and I don't know if I don't know where the buttons are, if I don't know, I mean, I messed up a moonshot last week because I didn't know where the buttons were and this whole thing. So, but now now I picked up my Canon today, and it's like, oh, how does this work? You know, so you can adjust pretty quickly.
Well, why don't you switch?
I don't want, I'll tell you. That's a whole other discussion. Canon is, look, Canon makes great cameras, they take great photos. Nikon, I mean, actually, if you're in the market for a new camera, personally, I don't think you can go wrong with any of the major manufacturers. Everybody from Sony, Fuji, Nikon, Canon, Panasonic is coming out with a full-frame mirrorless camera that I bet is going to be a great camera. You can't go wrong with any of the new cameras. So I had a very specific reason for changing, but it really only applies to how I do what I do. So, not to say that Canon isn't great.
It can be very subjective. It can be
It's a very subjective thing.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing. If you go, like when we're done, go out there and play with the camera. And pick a camera that feels good in your hand, because if you don't like the way it feels, it doesn't matter how good the pictures are, you're not going to use it. So you got to be happy with it, and you can't go wrong with any of the new cameras. Question?
Did you go to the 850?
Yeah, 750 and 850. You had a question for Gina?
Yeah, when you usually shot in Times Square, literally from your head, you said you used a high speed. What is a high speed?
For me, like doing that, like on the fly pictures,
Yeah.
it's usually about 500 is the speed that I'm using on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
I
1/500?
Street photography, like actually
Yeah.
capturing people. I want to get better at that, and I've heard, oh, you use a high.
Yeah, use like a high speed and like a low f-stop. But definitely go like to 500, and also do, if you have it on your camera, continue like auto continuous, where it tracks the person, you'll get them pretty in focus.
So AFC.
Yeah.
Now, some people actually like to shoot street photos where people are actually blurred a little bit while they're moving. So you can do that as well with a slower shutter.
Another way to do that is do what's called zone focusing. So if you stop down your camera, say like f8 to f11 or something like that, you can get it into a range that you'll know what distance will be in focus. And then you can just know that if somebody's a few feet away from you, that you're going to get the shot no matter what, and then just focus on your shutter speed. So it's a common street photography way of getting around some of those issues and not having to deal with autofocusing. So I typically shoot all my photography in manual focus. So that's my way of doing those types of shots.
And it also helps to shoot from the hip. If you have a LCD screen that flips up, a lot of the newer cameras have that. So for street photography, some people don't like to have the camera to their eye. They don't want to, they want to be more discreet about it.
If you like taking pictures of people, is that what you're looking to do?
Yeah, and I'm like really checking if somebody's
Well,
catching me.
I also have home a Sony, what is it, what is that camera we have, the little one?
The
that you put on the
RX100?
stick? The X100?
RX100.
RX100. And you put it on a stick, it's just a lens thing, it's not an actual camera. And you look in your cell phone at the stuff, so you can put the stick right here and take a picture of Peter and he doesn't even know you're doing it. And it comes out beautiful.
So it's not just your cell phone?
Yeah, well, you see the view on your cell phone, but you're taking the picture on the floor. So you like leave it there, and you're like, oh, I'm looking at my cell phone. Meanwhile, you're taking pictures of people, and they have no idea.
So you're able to view it on what you're shooting.
Right,
on
and
your
they
phone.
come out crisp as anything.
And they're unique perspectives, because not many people get shots from on the floor.
Right, you have great perspective. I love that little thing. I don't know if they're still selling them.
No.
Like eBay, you may be able to get them on eBay and stuff
Or
like
maybe
that.
Unique Photo might have a few percent.
Maybe they have some too.
You can also ask permission from people.
You could.
There are some people who walk around and they say, hey, I love street photography, can I take your picture? And a lot of people will say yes.
See, that's why I didn't submit a lot of that work to the book, because you have to have a release
You
from
need
some of the
permission.
people. That's why my street photography I didn't submit to Peter, because I can't put people in the book without their permission, you know?
That's right. If you do want to commercially use somebody's image, then you do have to have a release.
Yeah, you have to have a release
So
form.
there are photographers who walk around with a release on their phone that they can sign electronically. Maybe you guys know Humans of New York, that whole photo
Right.
project. He went around for 2 years asking permission, got people to sign off, and he's got quite a thing going there. So.
Yeah, when you're shooting in New York and you need a tripod, can you recommend a manufacturer that you like in terms of portability and also to be able to conceal it?
I don't know.
I'm not going to recommend a particular brand, but there are all sizes, all shapes. I mean, we're really, if you go on Amazon, there's so many choices now. I go through tripods pretty quickly. My tripods last maybe a year, so I don't invest in, I buy the cheaper ones. I actually have big, heavy duty, but for what you're talking about, I wouldn't spend more than $100, $150 on something, because I know it's not going to last me 5 years later anyway. So, but that's just me. I know some people like to spend a lot of money.
Me Photos have good small ones. You have the Benro Adventure
yeah.
series. There's a ton of really small ones.
And
One
you
thing
also
to look.
have-
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say you also have, I believe it's called platypods, where, and those are just, they're very small and kind of easy to carry around.
Just make sure they typically advertise how much weight they can hold. So just make sure
Yes.
they can hold your camera's weight.
Absolutely, and lens weight.
In those places where you can't bring a tripod, have any of you guys used a monopod, and has there been any objection or restriction with that?
I have a couple monopods, but I don't really use them.
I don't either.
I think that, again, if there's a restriction against having a tripod, the concern is people tripping over it. On top of the rock in particular, it gets so crowded up there, they may have a similar objection to a monopod. I don't know that that's going to get you over that hump I could be wrong, but I think it'll be met in the same way as a regular tripod. So you may as well bring the tripod.
One thing I found to really work is just be nice and kind of act as though you don't know the rules.
Yeah.
So if you just set up a camera and you're just taking some photos, you look like a tourist, try not to look like a pro, getting set up and being super serious about taking your photos. And then typically if someone comes over and starts talking to me, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Do you mind if I just take this one shot and I'll go away? And then they're normally like, fine, whatever.
The other approach might be look like a senior citizen with the
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you ever had concern with safety in all the night shots, night shoots, or early morning shoots that you do?
All right, I can only speak for myself, and I'm curious what you guys have to say about this issue. I'm from New York, you know, I've always, look, use common sense, you know, be smart. If you have a friend, go with a friend, something like that. The question was, are we concerned about safety being out shooting at night in different locations and all of that? I've never had any problems, and I bring a lot of equipment sometimes. I'm usually in and out. I don't camp out there for the whole night. You know, I don't get overly focused on stuff like that. I try to remember I have a purpose. I'm going to capture an image that I really want to have, and just stay focused on that. But you know, use common sense. You know, go with somebody else. The problem I have is with the police, quite honestly. I mean, I've been stopped by the cops 14 times in the last 3 years. Being someplace I'm not supposed to be to get that shot that nobody else is going to get. So I have a bigger problem with the cops than with the criminals. But
They give tickets.
They can give you summons. You know, if you're in a spot where you're not supposed to be, right? I think for me, I do avoid, just my personal preferences. I avoid kind of more remote locations at night, or I go and shoot with a group of people. Again, doesn't mean that it's not safe, it's just my comfort level.
Right? Like Jason said, if they do stop you, just be nice. Oh, I didn't know, I'm sorry, it works.
Well, if it's like, you know, I think also just with criminals, right?
Yeah.
Like running into a robber or something.
Oh, well, that, I was talking about the tickets and stuff.
And
Yeah.
if I could add something, Peter once told me that if you get in trouble, if you get a ticket, just selling that one print pays for it all. So it's
There you go.
well, yeah, if you get a parking ticket or if you get a summons or you know whatever. So yeah,
it's worth it.
let me say this too. I mean, you want to be okay. So I've done some dumb things in my career. You know, my friend Frank will tell you. One of the things is, you know, it's helpful to respect private property. I didn't always know that, and in a couple of times I got into a situation that was not so great on private property. But just think ahead, you know, somebody, if there's a security guard there, they don't know who you are, they don't know what you're doing, and they're armed, that could be a problem. You know, so I actually got locked into a truck depot once in Kearney, New Jersey. On a Friday night, the police had to come, the owner of the property had to come, it was a friggin' mess. And the shot wasn't even worth it when all was said and done.
How about the flowers that you had to buy?
The flowers? Well, that's another one, yeah. So you know, use common sense. But here's the thing, guys. If we get the same shots as everybody else, then we're just another New York City photographer. You know, we're all, you know, our friend Zoran over there, Zoran gets in situations that none of us want to be in, you know? So it's like you have to get creative. One of the things that we have is the advantage of knowing the city pretty well and all of that, but we have to do something different. You know, so we're always looking, and sometimes we don't share information with our friends because we want to get that shot. Often we do. You know, so there's a lot more to it. But your question is a good one. Anybody else want to address that?
Yeah, so just to chime in, it's inherently dangerous to be out in the dark, especially when there's like drunks and everything running around New York City. So one of the things I try to do is keep whatever shot I have in mind and only bring that equipment with me. So I don't need to bring my whole gear bag with me to get one shot that I have in mind, because it's thousands and thousands of dollars. If I get robbed, all that goes, and it's just because I was questioning whether or not I'm going to be able to get it with a certain lens. So at a certain point, just be confident in what you're doing, bring the gear that you need to bring, and don't bring everything you own with you. Because if you are robbed, then you might still have a backup camera or a backup lens at home.
Anybody else want to address that? Question?
I have a quick question. I was curious about your process. So, like you know, all the photos that you submitted to the book, like, they're incredible, and congratulations on that. But I'm wondering, like, how long did you stand in that spot to get that photo? Like, how many variations and clicks did you spend to get that photo? Like, is it 1,000 of one? You know what I mean? So I was just curious, like, how long you spend in that spot.
I'll let you guys start with that one.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think it depends. I think the answer is going to depend on photographer. It's going to depend on style and kind of what you're trying to capture. Usually, I'm similar to Jason in a sense where I like to go to a specific area and capture the image that I'm trying to capture, right, and kind of the light and whatnot. For me, it you know, it can take probably 30 to 50 shots, right, depending on the complexity of it. For someone else, they may just, like, you know, compile 200 shots in order to kind of see which one works out the best for them. I can say with as you become more experienced, the amount of shots you'll have to take is less because you kind of are more you're just a lot more aware of what you have to do and where you have to be. But that's my perspective.
Anybody else?
How about with the time exposures?
Well, wait, let me say one thing about that. So my thing is I tend to overshoot. I'm getting better at that. But one thing I've noticed is, well, this is what I say. Turn around. Wherever you're shooting and you think the scene is here, before you leave that spot, turn around and see what's behind you, because you never know.
Yeah.
You know what you're going to get. The other thing is I often don't know what I have until I get home. I never delete files while I'm out shooting, you know, unless it's overexposed or underexposed or whatever. It's often not till I get back that I see it on the computer on a bigger screen. I can begin to appreciate what's there, you know. And I don't think there's any rule. I think you're going to figure out for yourself what works for you, what doesn't, you know, in terms of that. If you're really good and you know, okay, the light's perfect. I mean, there are some people who have that. I don't have that. I got to take a lot of shots to capture the moment. So it's a lot of moments.
I'm the exact opposite from Peter. So I'll spend like 10, 15 minutes walking around and finding what I think is the strongest composition, and then I'll just sit there and wait. I'd probably walk out with like 10 photos. Sometimes I'll play around with exposure compensation just to make sure I didn't blow out my highlights or anything along those lines. And I'm perfectly happy with just one photo. If I go there and I think I got the best possible photo from that day at that location, then I'm happy. I don't need 20 photos.
And if you're familiar with bracketing on your camera, always recommended, especially when you're shooting on a tripod, because you'll get essentially 3 different exposures of the same scene as well. And that way, post-processing, you can either use one of them, you can kind of combine all 3 to get the most out of your light. But I always recommend some bracketing there, so you get a multiple exposed shot of that particular moment.
And when you bracket, how many? I mean, I do it. I don't know all the technical terms. Like, I know there's spaces in between. Like, do you go like?
Well, you can do it based on, I mean, if you're doing it on, if you're using it based on f-stop, you can kind of go, you know, 1 f-stop, 2 f-stops.
Right, so what do you usually do?
Usually I do 1, and yeah, and I take either 3 or 5 brackets depending on, kind of depending on the photo.
Oh, okay.
So anybody who doesn't know, bracketing is taking multiple exposures of the same image. You can set that automatically in your camera to underexpose, certain number of stops, overexpose, and then you can combine those images to increase the dynamic range of your image, or just to capture that one image that's the proper exposure. You had a question?
Yeah, your long exposures. You know, is there any trick for that in terms of getting the right exposure?
For me personally, so I've done it enough now that I have a pretty good sense based on which filter I'm using. So we use neutral density. If you're shooting a long exposure during the day, long exposure is anything other than a normal exposure. And if it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, you have to have a way to regulate the amount of light that's coming into the camera, because it would be very easy, especially in the middle of the day, to overexpose. So we use what are called neutral density filters. Those filters come in variable densities or darknesses, that's the right word. And basically you calculate based on, so I typically will use either a 6-stop ND filter plus 3-stop ND grad. And I use that typically for sunrise or sunset. The middle of the day, I'm going to be using at least a 10-stop ND filter. And I know now that based on the amount of light, based on my camera settings, you know, if I'm at f16 with a 10-stop ND filter, ISO 100, my exposure is probably going to be somewhere around 20 to 30 seconds, maybe more. A lot of the cameras won't meter properly when you have like a 10-stop filter on the front, so you have to take some test shots. But the good thing about digital is you can play it back after your exposure and you'll know whether or not you're underexposed or overexposed.
Another trick when using a neutral densities filter, it's not even a trick, I mean it's an absolute must, is if you're shooting autofocus, don't. And the reason why is because you can set up your shot as you want, right? And you have to do that, but once you put on your density filter, whether it's 10-stop or even 6-stop, it becomes, you can't see anything in front of you. And so if you shoot it and the focus changes, if it's still on autofocus, then you're in trouble because your shot's gonna come out not as intended. So set it all up, manual focus, make sure it's on manual focus, then put on your filter and shoot.
Like when you shot over the water, what typically do you need as a minimum length to smooth out the water? Or, I guess, what else?
Well, for that, I believe I used, I mean, there was some light that was coming out. I believe I used a 6-stop for that. Now, when it's pretty dark outside, meaning nighttime, or even as you know, as blue hour starts to happen, you don't need a neutral density filter for that. But if you're talking about number of seconds to actually get that level of smoothness, right? My recommendation is to keep your shutter open for at least 30 to really get a smooth feel. Now, it also, if you're shooting, for example, a river, though, it really depends on the force of the movement, right? You won't need that much time if the water is already moving. So it also depends on the environment that or the subject that you're shooting, and the movement already going on within that subject.
I was just going to say too, it's manual focus, also usually manual exposure too, because the camera will not know, typically not know, especially with a 10-stop,
for sure,
what the proper exposure is going to be. Other questions?
Max had some great lightning shots here in World Trade Center. So I was wondering, how wet did you get, and how long did you have to wait in the sequence to get there?
Well, I could spend up to like about 3 hours out there at the end of the pier shooting, and I positioned myself in this tunnel where there used to be a lot of shipping containers moving through, so I'm pretty secured from any bullets hitting me or weather, but I have to keep wiping my lens and making sure that the drops are off the lens, but. Yeah, and I just shoot continuously for about 3 hours, and my record is 13 strikes in one night for the World Trade.
Yeah, we know that, I mean, lightning is static electricity. It looks for the path of least resistance. So typically, it's either going to be the Empire State Building or the World Trade Center. So we set up we track the storms. There's great apps on your phone now. You can see when the storm is coming. You can even see when the lightning's coming. And then we just set up and wait, and it is, the hardest thing is often keeping the lens clean as well as keeping dry, so. Anybody else?
Really question about shooting in the cold. So I don't, because I'm a wuss, but I realize there's a lot of good shots to be had. Is there a good glove out there to use that keeps your hands warm? I heard you guys just use Costco hand warmers or something.
So the problem is I've spent a lot of time on finding good gloves. It's like you still need to be able to operate your camera.
Yeah.
So that's actually a reason why I love the Fuji, because there's all dials on the top, so I don't have to sit there and play with the menus, which makes my life a lot easier, but no, I'm normally frozen.
it's gonna be cold either way, right? Because when you're trying to operate your camera as well, I mean, if you do use gloves, I do recommend kind of gloves that you can, for your index and your thumb, that you have the option to remove the cover, right? Oh, God.
Are these like photography gloves, or just like you just get these gloves?
They have photography gloves, but you don't, I mean, you can get non-photography gloves that work for this purpose. You don't need to pay a premium for photography gloves to kind of get the same effect. So long as you have warm gloves that can go fingerless, whether it's thumb or index or all of them, you're fine.
I just cut off the fingers I use. That's what I do.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
I'm doing layers, so I'm doing thin liners
Yep.
and then the heavier gloves.
That too.
But I have yet to find a glove that really is either warm or, it seems to be mutually exclusive, lens, a glove that's warm or a glove that you can operate a camera with.
Functional.
So.
Hand warmers work.
Oh yeah, hand warmers. You know, I buy the 40 case of hand warmers and just keep them in the
Yeah, those also work.
in the knapsack, in the backpack.
Liners and mittens work well.
What?
Can't hear you.
Liners and mittens work well.
Mittens.
Liners and mittens.
I mean, mittens are awesome for heat.
Use your. Put the mittens back on.
Yeah, for me, there's been no ideal solution. I've tried most of them.
My most important thing is making sure that you keep feeling, at least in your shooting hand, because once you lose feeling in your hand, it makes it extremely difficult to shoot. Like I've lost feeling in my hand.
Impossible sometimes.
Yeah, so especially if you're dealing with neutral density filters, like these are really expensive pieces of glass that you're putting in front of your camera. And once you don't have feeling in your hands anymore and you're trying to manage that, you're just hoping for the best.
Yeah.
So there's only so many hand warmers and gloves you can use, so just make sure you keep feeling in your hands.
All right, so we're almost out of time. I have a question for these guys, and maybe it's of interest to you guys as well. So do you guys travel, your day-to-day life, going to work with a camera, or do you not bring a camera with you on a regular basis?
I do not. Reason being, unless there's a planned shot that I can manage to take either before, during sunrise before work or after work. But usually it's planned in advance. I don't always carry my equipment.
Gina?
I carry it all the time.
Yeah, I carry it all the time. On bike, too.
Yeah.
So I used to, but now I'm planning it more.
I do not. Yeah, I'm much more planned and calculated when I choose to shoot.
No, I don't bring my camera with me either.
So that's the same for me. I'm very intentional when I shoot. I don't drive around with a camera in my car. It's always planned for me in terms of when and where I shoot. So I'm not one of those. It's not to say it's right or wrong. I'm just curious. Any last questions? Marty?
Question, yeah. Peter, how much do you guys do post-processing for a photo that you take?
So I think it's different for everybody. I'm going to say for myself, I shoot raw, raw file format, and like a film negative, that file has to be developed. The whole point of a raw file is there's no baked-in settings, there's no contrast, color, and so I add that through the process of developing that raw file. And then I do like to do dodging and burning. I like to play with local color and contrast adjustments and all of that. I even occasionally, I admit it, use a filter, the NIK collection. If I have a really kind of boring image, I find that spruces it up a little bit. I'm finding the less time I spend now on post-production, the better, because I used to really go crazy with that. The big thing for me, especially as an official photographer for Fireworks by Grucci, I'm dealing a lot with very high contrast situations. So fireworks exploding in the night sky, there's a huge contrast difference between the foreground and that explosion. So I'm always looking to protect my highlights, because the thing with a digital file is once those highlights are gone, there's no information there. So I'm doing everything I can to protect those highlights. That means And I do that a lot with my moon photos, and I do that just with a lot of nighttime cityscape photos. And so that means I'm protecting my highlights. That means when I do post-production, I have to bring up the shadows and all of that. And so there is work involved. It's not just coming straight out of the camera, you know. You know, Ansel Adams said this many years ago. He said, great photos are made, not taken. He also spent hours developing his negatives. He was doing all the stuff we're doing in the computer. He was doing it with the chemical bath, you know, and that was his thing. And he spent a lot of time printing and all of that. So even though I've had many photos published in the newspaper, I don't consider myself a photojournalist, but I don't add things. Like I won't take a photo of the Empire State Building and then stick a moon photo, or stick a lightning photo, or an airplane window photo. You know, I don't do that.
Well, that would be the definition of a photo being kind of photoshopped, right? When you're kind of starting to add objects or things that aren't
Like the
originally
cups,
part
yeah.
of the image.
It's not good or bad. I mean, that's
No, it's
art.
not.
That's creating
It's
art, but that's not photography as I understand it.
Well, debatable to some, but yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
You guys, anybody?
Yeah, so one interesting thing is I've kind of developed in Lightroom like my edit as a preset. So any photo I import into Lightroom, it just automatically goes through what I consider to be my baseline editing. And then, so I don't really spend much time at all editing my photos. It just goes through this basic edit at the import, and then I just make a few tweaks based on the photo. Generally, it's not, I don't want anybody to really look at my photos to say, oh my God, that's so over-processed. I mean, a lot of times I try to get in the most dynamic lighting and conditions. So some people do comment and say, oh, there's so much saturation. I was like, no, it was really quite bright when I was there. But yeah, generally it's just some contrast, some highlights, and typically more warmth are in my photos. But it's really quite quick in terms of an editing process.
Dick, how do you process? How does Vic process its images?
Usually I use like the raw files for the most part. I don't know what else to say about that, but that's, yeah, I usually just use the raw files.
You know, the great thing about great thing about digital technology is, you know, you get instant feedback about what's working and what's not working. And, you know, it's created, look, people with iPhones take great photos, you know, I mean, there's so many opportunities now to create art and to express yourself through digital technologies like photography or music for some people, filmmaking and all of that. So why not use the tools that are available? You know, I mean, that's kind of my take on it. But it's a personal thing. You know, it's different for everybody.
And there's some smartphones now that have an amazing kind of pixel counts and allow you to take photos in RAW so that you can post-process them. And so, I mean, in order to kind of make a beautiful image, I don't think you need the most expensive DSLR or mirrorless or whatnot. You can absolutely work with some of the things you have. Yeah.
So, you know, I do a lot of commercial work, and those photos have to be perfect. So stuff for product photography that's going to be used in advertising and a website, you know, a billboard or something like that, that stuff has to look perfect. And so I'm glad I invested, you know, back in the day, I invested about a month learning Photoshop. Where I spent like 2 hours a day for a month just to learn that program, and that was the best I ever did. But it's really specific for those clients. You know, they want something that's going to put their product in the best light. So you really have to work on those images. Question?
For those of you that use either Photoshop or Lightroom, could you give us a quick and dirty on the benefits and the pros and cons of Classic and the cloud? I've started using Lightroom on my iPad, especially when I travel. And I'm not entirely sure that it's that bad. I mean, there's been a lot of bad press about it, but I think it's pretty good. Do you guys have any experience between the two?
I mean, are you talking about Lightroom Express, the version that's on your that you can get on your iPhone or your iPad and use it?
So, there are two versions. There's the classic that
Yep.
we use on a hard drive and computer, and there's the Creative Cloud. They're
Yep.
both Creative Cloud, but the Creative Cloud is now entirely cloud-based. There are no hard drives or no backups necessary, no catalog system, thank God.
There isn't a cataloging system. Which, it's funny because I think, I would say a lot of photographers actually probably miss that part of Lightroom Classic, the cataloging, and they still have Lightroom Classic in order to be able to kind of look at all of their raw files at once. Wherein with the new Creative Cloud, it doesn't allow for that. It's funny because I actually
You can put it up on a screen, that's not a problem.
You could, but I think in order to just compare all of your, especially from an editing standpoint, when you're looking to merge images or combine certain images, it just gives you a good way to look at all of your files, right? I don't use Lightroom. I use Lightroom for the catalog, but then I import to Photoshop and I just work my edits off of Photoshop because that's just what I'm used to. But Bill, I know you're a big Lightroom.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
for me, I tried the cloud. I like the classic better. I've been shooting RAW and JPEG for the last 4 years, but in the last year I've just been editing solely RAW. And if you've been working on JPEG and moved over to RAW, you get so much more detail when you're editing. So for me, classic works, and
Editing RAW.
editing RAW. I don't edit JPEG anymore. In addition, I'm learning more about Photoshop, not to add necessarily things, but you can really have a better final product with some of the things that I've been reading. And so that's what I'm working on for myself.
All right, one last question, anybody?
This photo that was in the cover, is it shot from Governor's Island or?
I took that photo from Red Hook. That's
Louis Valentino Park?
Yeah, it's Valentino. There's a fishing pier in Red Hook. The Valentino Park or something like that. So now here's an interesting thing. So this was not for Grucci. This was something. So over the last few years, what's been happening more and more are these private fireworks shows around New York City. So typically there's July 4th shows. There may be something on New Year's. But more and more private individuals, corporations are commissioning fireworks displays to commemorate an event. This was actually somebody's wedding. And so what you want to do is you want to find out when those events are happening so you can be there to photograph them. The best, we used to have to look at the Coast Guard records because most of these things are done off a barge, and anything that's done by barge has to be registered with the Coast Guard. Now you can just go to nyc.gov, that website, and just search for fireworks shows or whatever, and you'll get upcoming events so you can be there to take the pictures. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. If you want to get your book signed, hang out. If you want to buy a book, you can do that as well. And follow us on social media.